My mother-in-law came to see her grandkids. She had no idea her son had abandoned us months ago. She walked in expecting warmth, a grandmotherly visit to her cherished grandchildren. What she found, however, was a scene already shaped by absence, a void she hadn't anticipated. In that instant, I knew my life was about to become a war I had to win. The instant Meredith Vance's gaze settled on the stark, empty space where a cherished photograph once hung, I saw the calculations begin in her eyes, a silent, immediate judgment of where the blame lay. She hadn't even shed her elegant camel coat, nor removed her pearl earrings. I stood there, utterly depleted from days of fractured sleep, my infant, Leo, gnawing softly on my shoulder, Chloe, my preschooler, leaning against my leg, clutching her blocks. Formula stains dotted my sleeve, visible testaments to the chaos of my new reality. As I watched her assess my life, moving her gaze from the stack of unread mail near the entrance to the forgotten laundry pile by the stairs, and finally to the gaping rectangle on the bookshelf where Julian's and my wedding portrait had once proudly stood, her expression shifted with startling speed. What began as feigned concern hardened into a cold evaluation, swiftly followed by a definitive verdict. I almost missed the subtle, chilling transformation. "Why is that frame empty?" she asked, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the house. In that precise instant, a chilling clarity settled over me. The coming months would be a relentless battle. I would have to navigate this war, not only keeping my 2 young children alive and emotionally whole, with a teething baby clinging to my hip, but also entirely alone. For years, throughout my entire marriage, I had been profoundly underestimated. I realized then that this very oversight would become my most potent weapon. It's important you understand who I am. My name is Eleanor Vance, or at least it was for 7 years. I'm currently in the process of deciding which identity I'll carry forward. I'm 34, and I hold a master's degree in public health. That career path, however, was paused when Chloe arrived, simply because the cost of childcare outweighed the benefits, and Julian's income was more than sufficient. It was a mutual decision, one we both believed made perfect sense at the time. Chloe is now 4, and Leo is 8 months old. For the past 3 years, I've been the undisputed orchestrator of our home life, meticulously scheduling every appointment, managing every grocery list, attending every pediatric checkup, handling every sleepless night feeding, and dutifully tracking every developmental milestone within a baby app that Julian rarely bothered to glance at, often asking for a brief summary instead of reviewing it himself. Let me be clear, I am not a passive individual. I don't simply drift through life. Becoming a stay-at-home mother was a conscious, deliberate choice, one I made with my eyes wide open. I will vehemently defend that decision against anyone who dares to suggest it diminishes my worth. Julian Vance, at 37, is a civil litigation attorney, a junior partner at Estabrook and Howell in Columbus. He's blonde, conventionally handsome in a way that photographs perfectly but reveals very little beneath the surface. In the initial years of our marriage, he was engaging, warm, and genuinely witty. I loved him with the fervor of a 26-year-old who still believed the world would bend to her will. Then Chloe was born, and the delicate balance between us began to subtly shift. It wasn't a dramatic upheaval, nor an immediate collapse, but rather an insidious erosion, much like water slowly, invisibly wearing away stone until, one day, the entire structure is simply gone. By early 2023, his late nights at the office became a regular occurrence. I observed these changes the way one senses a shift in the weather, a subtle alteration in the atmosphere before the exact nature of the storm can be named. He ceased asking about my day. He began retreating to the backyard to take his phone calls. His travels for depositions took him to cities I'd never heard him mention in relation to any of his cases. I rationalized it all as work-related stress. The firm was surely pushing him harder for partnership. The billing targets, I knew, were brutal. He must be under immense pressure, I convinced myself. I told myself many things. The incriminating text arrived on a Tuesday evening in September. Leo was barely 3 weeks old, and I felt as though I hadn't truly slept in 72 hours. Julian had excused himself after dinner, muttering, "I just need some air. I've been cooped up inside all day." I was settled on the sofa, feeding Leo, when his phone vibrated on the coffee table. A name I didn't recognize flashed across the screen, Sierra. Just the name, and the first 2 words of a message before the screen abruptly locked, "I miss." My hand trembled as I carefully placed the phone face down. I gazed at my sleeping infant, then calmly finished his feeding. After gently placing Leo in his bassinet, I returned to the couch and sat in the profound darkness, breathing with meticulous care for what felt like an eternity. I had a newborn and a 3-year-old slumbering upstairs, and the stark truth was, I simply couldn't afford to fall apart. An hour later, Julian returned. He smelled of crisp night air, and unmistakably, someone else's perfume. I remained utterly silent. The very next morning, I began constructing what I would internally refer to as the folder. This folder, I must impress upon you, became the absolute core of everything that followed. My professional background is in public health research. I possess an innate understanding of documentation, of what constitutes credible evidence, and how to organize it effectively so it's useful beyond my own comprehension. So, as the insidious truth about my marriage began to dawn on me, I did not unravel. I did not confront. I certainly didn't send a desperate, tear-filled 2 a.m. text message demanding to know who Sierra was. Instead, I meticulously compiled. I started with our shared cell phone records. Through our carrier's online portal, I accessed and downloaded 6 months of call logs. Sierra's number first appeared in April. By August, she was receiving more call minutes than I was. By September, the very month Leo was born, a staggering 4,200 minutes of outgoing calls had been made to her number. Next, I scrutinized our credit card statements. Our joint American Express, used for household expenses, allowed me to trace 12 months of transactions. There were charges for restaurants I'd never visited, hotel stays in cities Julian had claimed were for depositions, and a distinct jewelry purchase from a downtown boutique, items that were decidedly not mine. I cataloged every single detail in a private Google sheet, noting dates, amounts, and adding columns for corroborating information. I also took screenshots of my own text messages, not touching his phone, but preserving every instance where his reported schedule directly contradicted what I later uncovered in the credit card records. Working late at the office tonight, for example, often coincided with an AMX reservation at a restaurant 40 minutes away, for 7:30 p.m. I cunningly labeled this digital archive, medical records, and stored it in a Google Drive account Julian was unaware of. For extra security, I backed it up onto a thumb drive, which I concealed inside a tampon box in the bathroom cabinet. I understand how this might sound, perhaps paranoid, cold, or even calculated. But with a newborn and a toddler, I was so profoundly sleep-deprived I was verging on hallucination. Yet, some functional part of my brain remained acutely clear. If my suspicions were correct, I would need months of prepared evidence, not a panicked scramble after everything inevitably exploded. And I was correct. He finally departed on the second Tuesday of October. He waited until Chloe was at preschool and Leo was deeply asleep. With the precise, almost practiced efficiency of someone who had meticulously planned his exit, he packed 2 bags. He then placed his car and house keys deliberately on the kitchen counter. Finally, he sat opposite me at the table and stated, without a hint of irony, that he deserved happiness, that our marriage had become an unbearable source of stress, and that I, being the stronger one, would undoubtedly be fine. I sat across from him, cradling Leo, and did not shed a single tear. He left at precisely 10:47 a.m. From the kitchen window, I watched his sleek Audi disappear down the driveway. The moment it was out of sight, I picked up my phone and called Isabella. Her name was Isabella Rossi. She boasted 17 years in family law, with 8 of those dedicated specifically to complex asset division and custody disputes within Franklin County. Isabella had short, practical hair and favored reading glasses perched like a headband on her forehead. She possessed a remarkable way of listening, making you feel as though she had not only anticipated every word you were about to utter but already had a carefully considered response ready. My initial call to her had been 3 weeks prior, before Julian's departure, when I was still deep in the documentation phase. She had listened patiently for 40 minutes as I presented my organized, thoroughly sourced, and meticulously time-stamped account, never once interrupting. When I finished, her advice was succinct and powerful: file first. The parent who establishes the framework controls the narrative. On October 16th, I formally filed for temporary primary custody and child support. Julian was served the papers on October 21st. That afternoon, between 4 o'clock and 6:30 p.m., his phone rang a relentless 11 times. I allowed every single call to go straight to voicemail, then forwarded the entire call log to Isabella. After that, I calmly proceeded with Chloe's preschool pickup, returned home to prepare dinner, managed bath time, and settled both children into bed. At 8:45 p.m., I found myself eating a solitary bowl of cereal, standing at the kitchen counter, meticulously reviewing the custody petition line by line. I had deliberately kept everyone else in the dark, not Julian's parents, not even my own, nor any mutual friends. My circle of confidence was limited to Isabella and my sister, Sarah, who lived in Cincinnati. Sarah was the one I called after the children were asleep. She listened without offering platitudes or advice, instead providing the specific, loving silence of someone who cared enough not to utter, "I told you so." Thus, when Meredith Vance materialized on my porch 4 days after Julian received the papers, all perfectly coordinated snacks, pearl earrings, and that ubiquitous camel coat, radiating an entirely fabricated warmth, she was utterly oblivious to the true state of affairs. I witnessed the precise instant her meticulously constructed facade crumbled as the reality hit her. Julian moved out, I stated calmly. 3 weeks ago. I could almost trace the path of the information as it registered in her mind. Meredith Vance, at 61, was the epitome of controlled elegance, a controlled home, impeccably controlled attire, and an emotional register always held firmly in check. In the 7 years I had known her, she had never once openly expressed distress. Her preferred mode was concern, a carefully modulated form of distress that allowed her to maintain an aura of authority. A flicker of this concern crossed her face, swiftly followed by something far more sinister. I then handed her the printed text message Julian had sent me the night he left. Isabella had advised me to keep physical copies of all primary documents, and a part of me, knowing this confrontation was inevitable, had yearned to be fully prepared. She read it once, then a second time. Finally, her eyes met mine, revealing something I had neither anticipated nor will ever forget. The anger burning within her gaze was not directed at her son. It was entirely, furiously, leveled at me. You must have driven him to this, she declared, her voice laced with venom. I had braced myself for shock, perhaps grief, or even a cold neutrality. What I had not expected was that accusation, spoken by a woman who held undeniable proof of her son's abandonment of his wife and two young children, one merely 8 weeks old. Yet, there it was. She began to pace, her movements stiff and deliberate. The room, in her scathing assessment, was a disaster, which it was, in a way. It was the functional disaster of a home with a teething infant, a rambunctious preschooler, and no second adult to share the load. This is fundamentally different from neglect, much as a battlefield differs from a neglected garden. To conflate the two reveals much about one's priorities. Plenty of women manage, she declared dismissively. No wonder he needed distance. With a husband, I retorted. She snapped back, telling me to watch my tone. Then she halted her pacing, fixing me with an unervingly calculating stare. Where is he staying? Across town, I replied. With Sierra. Her face contorted into something indecipherable. Who is Sierra? She demanded. The woman he abandoned us for. Her denial was instant and absolute. She shook her head vehemently before I could even finish my sentence. What followed was a condescending lecture about the pressures on men and the wives who failed to support them. Her eyes raked over me as she spoke, a blatant inspection designed to critique my disheveled bun, the formula stain on my sleeve, my undeniably tired face. She was tallying my supposed failures, and I was clearly losing. My jaw clenched. You will not insult me in my own home, I stated, my voice steady. She scoffed. Your home. Julian provides for everything. This was patently false. I had earned $48,000 freelancing in public health consulting over the past 18 months, all while navigating pregnancy, newborn care, and preschool drop-offs. Isabella had the precise records to prove it, but that wasn't the point. The point was Meredith had already crafted a narrative of our marriage where Julian was the unwavering foundation and I merely a negligent tenant. He had clearly been building his defense for months, perhaps even longer. Then, she took a decisive step forward, and the very atmosphere of the room shifted. Let me take the children, she stated, her voice edged with command. Chloe, sensing the tension, pressed herself tightly against my leg, utterly silent and still. Children, I've learned, grasp truths long before they can articulate them. No, I answered, shaking my head. You're emotional right now. You need time to think. I am their grandmother, she countered, her voice dropping into a smooth, private tone, the kind used by someone accustomed to conducting sensitive negotiations without witnesses. If you cooperate, we can resolve this quietly. That word, quietly. It is, in my experience, the most treacherous word in the English language when uttered by someone seeking to protect an institution. I calmly pulled out my phone. Go ahead, I said, meeting her gaze. Call him. She was already scrolling through her contacts, her thumb poised over Julian's name. Because, I continued, I've already called my lawyer. I filed for temporary custody last week, and the child support petition is attached. Julian was served yesterday. The transformation on her face was not one of shock, but rather the stark stillness of someone rapidly recalculating, someone who had just discovered the chessboard was not arranged as she had painstakingly envisioned. Her jaw tightened visibly. Julian was served yesterday, she repeated, her voice deceptively measured. At 2:17 p.m., I clarified, at his office. Isabella Rossi dispatched the process server. All the details are on file with the Franklin County Court. She stared at me for a long, heavy moment before finally calling Julian. He arrived 12 minutes later, his shirt wrinkled, his jaw unshaved, the clear visual of a man who had spent 4 days believing he held the upper hand, only to walk into a situation that strongly suggested otherwise. He stepped through the door and his eyes fell on Chloe, who regarded him with the piercing, unblinking focus children reserve for adults who have thoroughly bewildered them. Then he saw Leo and his bouncer, and his mother standing rigidly, a statue in the center of the room. Finally, his gaze landed on me, standing protectively between my children and both of them, precisely where I had been for the past 3 weeks, and where I intended to remain. You filed papers, he managed, his voice incredulous. You left, I responded. You needed me. You moved in with another woman. Meredith interjected sharply, Julian, take the children to my house, right now. No, I stated firmly. His voice hardened. They're my kids. Then act like it, I shot back. The ensuing silence was specific and profound, the kind that descends when an undeniable truth lands amidst people who are utterly incapable of refuting it. Chloe looked up at her father, her small face etched with the complex confusion of a 4-year-old who had been grappling to understand something for 3 weeks, and still couldn't. Daddy, she whispered, are you coming back home? He opened his mouth, but no words emerged. It wasn't, I want to be honest, because he was overwhelmed with emotion. It was because he was calculating, as he always did, and in that moment, there was no favorable calculation to be made. Chloe buried her face into my side. That eloquent silence spoke more volumes than anything else in the room combined. Julian glanced from his mother to me, then to the empty frame. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in years crossed his face, perhaps shame, or merely the dawning recognition that certain performances no longer held sway. Not now, Mom, he mumbled. Meredith, her expression a mask of disbelief, looked at her son as if he had spoken in a foreign tongue. The script she had diligently followed for 30 years, enter, assert control, resolve quietly, protect the family name, had just been tossed back at her, and she had no idea what to do with it. She fixed me with one last, lingering, cold appraisal. Then she departed. The door clicked shut with a soft finality that felt far worse than any slam. Julian remained standing in the center of the home he had abandoned, his phone buzzing on his hip. He glanced at the screen, and something I had never before witnessed blossomed fully on his face. Not guilt, not shame, but pure, unadulterated panic. He quickly turned the screen to his chest before I could glimpse its contents. And in that moment, I knew, whatever Meredith had just set in motion, we hadn't seen the beginning of it yet. I was right. The targeted campaign against me began 48 hours later. I learned of it piecemeal from my neighbor, Brenda Miller, whose daughter attended Chloe's preschool and whose husband regularly golfed with a man who worked alongside Julian's father. Such is life in a smaller city, the distances between information and consequence are remarkably short. Meredith had made no fewer than 4 strategic phone calls within 24 hours of leaving my house. Her contacts included her pastor, the chair of the school fundraising committee she co-chaired with a prominent family law mediator named Glenn Hartley, her closest friend who also happened to serve on the Worthington Parent-Teacher Organization Board, and, most cunningly, a family therapist named Dr. Lena Hayes. Dr. Hayes had briefly counseled Julian for work-related stress in 2021 and had met me only once, at a casual dinner party. The narrative, pieced together for me by Brenda over the course of 3 days, was a masterclass in careful construction. It painted a picture of me becoming unstable since Leo's birth, of me utterly failing to cope, and of our home being in a deeply worrying state. Meredith, it was implied, had simply been a concerned grandmother dropping by to check in. Julian, poor man, was reportedly in an understandable difficult position, and everyone, naturally, was hoping for a quiet resolution. Sierra's name, notably, was never once uttered. I called Isabella at 7:15 a.m. that Thursday, while the children were still sleeping soundly. She's orchestrating a soft reputation campaign, Isabella stated, her voice as calm as if discussing the weather, clearly accustomed to such tactics. It's preemptive. She's attempting to establish a narrative of your incompetence before we even step foot into a courtroom. Can she succeed? I asked, my voice tight. She can try, Isabella replied. Here's what we're going to do. We moved swiftly. Step 1, Isabella requested the appointment of a guardian ad litem for Chloe and Leo. A GAL, as it's called, is an independent attorney whose sole purpose is to represent the children's best interests, not mine, not Julian's, and certainly not the Vance family's. The appointed JL was Daniel Chen, a lawyer with 12 years in family law and a reputation Isabella described as relentlessly fair, which, in a case like ours, meant he would meticulously follow the evidence. Step 2, I contacted Dr. Anya Sharma, our pediatrician, scheduling wellness visits for both children with an explicit request for comprehensive documentation. Chloe and Leo were, in fact, healthy, thriving, and developing entirely normally. Dr. Sharma had seen them consistently every 6 to 8 weeks, and her detailed records would unequivocally confirm this. During the Friday appointment, Dr. Sharma entered the exam room, took one look at my exhausted face, and gently asked, "How long has it been since you truly slept?" "Weeks," I admitted. She then observed Chloe, who was diligently arranging tongue depressors into a color-coded line on the exam table, and Leo, who was mesmerized by the ceiling fan with the intense focus only babies possess. "These children are healthy and clearly deeply loved," she affirmed, her words delivered directly and carefully, as if chosen specifically for the record. She made a discreet note in their charts. I asked her to document her observations about our home environment during future visits. She simply nodded, requiring no further explanation from me. Step 3, the evidence package. Isabella had spent weeks meticulously cataloging the contents of the folder I'd sent her, the call logs, the American Express statements, the hotel receipts, the jewelry purchase. Through preliminary financial disclosure, she had subpoenaed Julian's firm credit card records, unearthing 11 additional transactions, meals, hotel rooms, even a florist charge, all corresponding precisely with times he had claimed he was working. The Sierra file was now substantial. On October 30th, Isabella filed Exhibit C with our motion for temporary orders, a 61-page documentation package containing phone records, financial records, time-stamped correspondence, and a detailed declaration from me outlining the timeline of our marriage's deterioration, with specific reference to the documented infidelity. 3 days later, Julian's attorney, Marcus Thorne, a man with 23 years in family law, whose approach Isabella had aptly described as theatrical, filed a response. It vehemently asserted that I was emotionally volatile and had fostered a chaotic home environment. As his primary piece of evidence, he presented a photograph. I stared at the image for a long time. It depicted my living room, captured through the window from outside my house, toys scattered across the floor, laundry draped over the sofa, a pile of unopened mail near the door. It was, admittedly, a rather effective photograph of a home inhabited by 2 very young children and no second adult. From the quality of the light, I calculated it had been taken approximately 48 hours after Julian had been served, and Meredith had made her unexpected visit to my porch. Someone had deliberately stood on my lawn and photographed my living room through my window. A chilling dread settled over me. My hands went cold. I immediately called Isabella. That photograph was taken without your consent, from private property, she stated, cutting me off before I could finish explaining. That's highly relevant. More importantly, who took it? I remembered then the outdoor camera system, a smart doorbell with a wide field of view, that I had installed the previous spring. Julian had labeled it paranoid, I had called it practical. The footage covered my front porch and most of my front path. I pulled it up on my phone. October 23, 2:34 p.m. Meredith Vance, walking slowly along the exterior of my house, pausing deliberately at the living room window, then raising her phone. I absorbed that sight for 10 silent seconds. Then I called Isabella back. I have her on camera, I announced. The silence on the other end of the line was the precise, resonant quiet of an attorney who has just been presented with an invaluable piece of evidence. Send it to me immediately, she commanded. Don't tell anyone. Not Julian, not your sister, no one. Already sent, I confirmed. Daniel Chen, the Guardian ad litem, interviewed me on November 8 in Isabella's conference room. He was methodical, his voice even, as he asked questions covering every aspect of my life, my daily routine with the children, my support network, my aspirations for returning to work, and my relationship with Julian's family. He specifically inquired about Meredith's visit. I recounted it with unwavering accuracy, providing him with the detailed notes I had penned within an hour of her departure, exactly as Isabella had initially instructed. These notes included precise timestamps, direct quotes, observations of Chloe's behavior and Leo's condition, her demand to take the children, and the chilling mention of the word, quietly. Daniel Chen transcribed everything without betraying any emotion. Then he posed a critical question. In your judgment, what is Mrs. Vance's primary motivation in this matter? Control of the narrative, I asserted. She wants to contain what happened within the family, to prevent it from tainting Julian's professional reputation or the Vance family name. He looked up, his pen pausing. Specifically, I elaborated, she doesn't want anyone to know that her son abandoned a woman with an 8-week-old baby to move in with someone he'd been seeing for at least 6 months. He meticulously recorded that, too. Over the subsequent week, he interviewed Julian and Meredith separately. I was not privy to their conversations, and Isabella advised me not to speculate. I didn't speculate, I simply continued to prepare. The crisis I hadn't foreseen arrived on November 14th. It manifested as a certified letter from a family court mediation service, requested by Julian's attorney, proposing an emergency custody evaluation by a third-party psychologist. The evaluation was ostensibly framed as being in the best interests of the children and demanded both parents' participation within 5 business days. The psychologist they suggested was Dr. Adam Hayes. I stared at the name, a cold dread creeping in, then immediately called Isabella. He's Meredith's therapist's husband, Isabella confirmed, her tone sharp. I had it flagged 30 seconds after the letter came in. Can they really do that? I asked, my voice rising. They attempted it, she replied. We're filing a conflict of interest objection this afternoon. Daniel Chen has already been informed. She paused, then added, they're getting nervous. This is what nervous looks like. The objection was promptly filed. On November 17th, the court rejected the proposed evaluator due to the documented conflict. Marcus Thorne, in retaliation, filed a formal complaint against Isabella, which was reviewed and dismissed within 6 days. Soon after, Daniel Chen submitted his preliminary recommendation to the court. I received a call from Isabella at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. He recommended primary residential custody to you, she announced, her voice clear. Standard visitation for Julian, and child support calculated based on his firm income. Then she paused, allowing the weight of her next words to settle. And he flagged for the court's consideration that Mrs. Meredith Vance's conduct, specifically mentioning the unauthorized photography and the unannounced home access, represented a potential boundary issue that ought to be explicitly addressed in the final parenting plan. I found myself on the kitchen floor, where I had slid down against the cabinet when the phone rang, Leo sleeping soundly upstairs, and Chloe's bathwater gradually cooling. He flagged Meredith, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. By name. In the official record. I leaned my head back against the cabinet, staring at the ceiling. Mama, the water is cold. Chloe's voice drifted from the bathroom. Coming, baby, I called back, pushing myself to my feet. I walked down the hall, handled bath time, dressed them in pajamas, read 2 bedtime stories, and by 8:30 p.m., both children were peacefully asleep. Only then, sitting on the edge of my bed in the profound quiet, did I allow myself to fully absorb the crushing weight of 6 weeks of meticulously organized, relentless, and utterly exhausting warfare, all waged for the sake of my children. I didn't cry, but I was achingly close. The settlement conference took place on December 3rd, Isabella and I arrived promptly at 9 a.m. Julian and Marcus Thorne, his attorney, made their entrance at 9:07. Meredith was conspicuously absent, and by the terms of the parenting plan Isabella had so shrewdly crafted, she would remain irrelevant to any discussions without both parents' explicit consent. For the majority of the proceedings, we were kept in separate rooms, as is customary in such situations. A mediator named David Lee, a man with 26 years of experience in family court and the weary, knowing face of someone who had witnessed almost every conceivable way human beings can fail each other, moved tirelessly between our rooms for 4 long hours. Julian's initial counteroffer was for joint physical custody, a week-on, week-off arrangement, with no child support, claiming that costs would naturally equalize. Sierra's presence in his home, he insisted, was not a factor. My position, guided by Isabella's expert advice, was meticulously grounded in irrefutable evidence and precise specificity. Chloe's school and pediatric records were all tethered to my address. Leo's entire medical history, every primary care visit, every emergency, was documented under my coordination and address. In 2 years of Chloe's life, Julian had attended a mere 9 medical appointments. For Leo, he had attended 0. I presented the mediator with my comprehensive spreadsheet, the detailed chart records, and the call logs demonstrating precisely who had coordinated with the school, the pediatrician, and even the preschool waitlist. David Lee returned from Julian's room at 2:17 p.m. and sat across from me. He's prepared to agree to primary residential custody with you, he announced. Standard parenting time for his end, alternating weekends, 1 evening midweek, and child support at the calculated guideline amount. I glanced at Isabella, she returned my gaze, a subtle confirmation in her eyes. What about Sierra? I asked. David Lee nodded. He's agreed to a 90-day introduction period before any romantic partner is brought into contact with the children. This applies to both parties. Then, his expression subtly shifted. And regarding extended family access to the children, he continued, it will be subject to your mutual consent during his parenting time. Furthermore, unsolicited contact with your home or your children's school by any third parties is expressly prohibited and will constitute a parenting plan violation. He didn't need to utter Meredith's name. I understood completely. I sat with the implications for a moment. Yes, I said, a wave of quiet triumph washing over me. We accept. Julian and I formally signed the parenting plan on December 10th. Isabella emailed me a copy at 4:33 p.m., which I saved into a digital folder I unceremoniously labeled, Done. Immediately after, I left to pick Chloe up from preschool. She now attended 5 mornings a week, a schedule that had remained steadfast since October, precisely because her routine, a beacon of stability, had not been allowed to waver amidst all the swirling chaos. She burst through the door, running towards me with the unrestrained joy and full-body abandon only a 4-year-old who hasn't yet learned to temper delight can exhibit. She clutched my hand, bubbling with excitement. Mama, we made a gingerbread house, and mine fell down, but Miss Jenkins helped me glue it back together. Did it work? Mostly, I replied. One wall kept falling, but it's okay, she chirped, because you can't see it from the front. I held her small hand as we walked to the car, secured Leo into his car seat, and then glanced at my children in the rearview mirror. Chloe was earnestly detailing the structural failures of her gingerbread house, while Leo observed the passing world with his characteristic serene intensity. And as I listened to her innocent recounting, I found myself contemplating collapsing walls, and the enduring resilience required to rebuild, anyway. 3 months later, Meredith Vance called me. I almost let it go to voicemail. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was at the kitchen table, a warm mug of coffee beside me, a new consulting project open on my laptop. The children were safely at school and daycare. The familiar name flashed on my screen. I let it ring twice, then answered. Eleanor, she began, her voice sounding noticeably older, not drastically so, but enough to register. I wanted to. I've been meaning to. A rare, uncharacteristic pause stretched between us, the likes of which I had never before heard from a woman who meticulously filled every space in her sentences. I was wrong about what I said that day, she finally continued. I offered no sympathetic silence. I shouldn't have suggested you drove him to it, she added. That was wrong. I glanced down at my coffee. Thank you, I said, a genuine surprise in my tone. That means something. And it did. It wasn't enough, it was undeniably late, and it was partial in the way apologies from those who have made poor choices often are. But it was something. The children, she said, her voice softer, more careful. I'd like to see them. Speak to Julian, I replied. The schedule is outlined in the parenting plan. All arrangements go through him. The line went quiet again. Okay, she conceded. Okay, I echoed. I hung up. I sat there for a moment, the phone still in my hand. Then, I reopened my consulting project and immersed myself back in work. Chloe had a dentist appointment at 3:45, Leo had a well baby visit scheduled for the end of the month, dinner needed planning, a school project was due Friday, and life, undeniably, had to keep being built. The gingerbread wall had indeed fallen. But I had glued it back together. And from the front, the damage was imperceptible.